This is a sample organizational chart of what an Islamic bank would look like, and inshallah we'll set this as a context before we get into your specific questions, and I'll let Yusuf speak about the various areas within Islamic finance. Yusuf is involved with the Sharia control aspect, and he's involved with the Sharia side in terms of Sharia auditing of products and practices, and I'll let him explain how the various departments interact.
Assalamu alaykum everyone. Again, maybe just before I start speaking about the specific ways that the departments interact, it's important to take in the general perspective, which is that Islamic banks, as they function now, are in effect functioning very similar to the way conventional banks would function, with the difference being that they have the additional factor of trying to ensure that whatever transactions they engage in are deemed to be Sharia compliant by the Sharia board of the respective banks. So when we look at the general structure of Islamic banks, they tend to mirror the structure of conventional banks, and so we find very much the same departments, the same skill set, with certain additional factors which inshallah we will hopefully cover today. So is there anything? So if you look at, for example, this chart we have here, we see the obviously the CEO, the executive committee, and various executive decision-making bodies, and we see that the bank itself, Islamic banks tend to incorporate a variety of functions, amongst which is the corporate and investment banking unit, which tend to operate very much like conventional investment banks, in the sense that they would be involved in, for example, real estate, corporate banking in terms of syndications, investments. They would be property management. They would be private equity. Likewise, the retail banking, and the credit division is very much, once again, similar in terms of its analysis in the way a conventional bank would operate. Now, the only caveat towards all of this would be that there would be an additional level of governance, in effect being the Sharia division or the Sharia department of that institution, and they would be given all of these various aspects of the banking, of the banks, would be given certain guidelines by which they would liaise with the Sharia department. For example, when it comes to investment banking, there would be criterion with regards to the equity, with regards to the sort of transactions that could be engaged in. At each stage, the Sharia division would be involved.
Yusuf, can you explain to us outsiders? I mean, we get involved with training, and we hear a lot about the Sharia control of Islamic banks, where it's patchy. In some banks, it's a little bit more strident and strong, whereas in others, it's a bit more laissez-faire. How does it work in your bank in terms of your oversight on the various departments?
It's a very valid question, and I think that's sort of put a finger on the fact that Islamic banking, although I don't think people can necessarily consistently say that it's still in its infancy, in the sense that it's existed for about close to 20 years, but the processes are still being defined, and the standards by which things are done vary from jurisdictions to jurisdiction, from banks to bank. Now, the particular bank that I work for is known for its diligence when it comes to Sharia compliance, which of course is the reason why Islamic banks are known as being Islamic. So you'd expect all Islamic banks to be very diligent in their Sharia compliant procedures by which they audit transactions. However, this obviously the degree to which this is done varies from bank to bank. Now, for example, my bank, when it comes to retail transactions, we have what's called a 100% audit system, whereby any transactions are entered into an automated system, and there are specifically retail Sharia auditors assigned to the various transactions to okay the transaction. I myself, I work in the corporate investment banking and treasury aspects of my bank. So, for example, my job is to review the transactions that take place at the level of treasury, to actually review the deals, the deal tickets, to make sure that the correspondence between the dealers at the outset are actually Sharia compliant, and then also to make sure that the specific sequences of the operations are done in a way that is Sharia compliant. At the level of corporate banking, we're involved in client meetings, we're involved in the initial structuring of transactions, we're involved in the subsequent review of documentation. Investment banking, likewise, we're involved in when it comes to structures, when we're involved we're constantly monitoring any equity that the bank has purchased to make sure it fulfills the Sharia guidelines that are stipulated by the Sharia department.
Now, Yusuf, a lot of these queries are going to come up later on, but I'd just like to ask initially, in terms of a person who is looking at career options in Islamic finance, what kind of person do you feel is ideal in this market, and what can a newcomer do to make oneself ideal?
Well, I think a lot of these questions have deep philosophical underpinnings, in the sense that we need to first define what direction we want Islamic finance to go in. And I think it's important to perhaps speak from an as-is perspective, as the industry is today, and perhaps touching a to-be perspective, which is the way the initial people who conceived of Islamic finance thought Islamic finance would be. Now, Islamic finance as it is today is very much a mirror of conventional finance. So if we look at this diagram today, you'd find that most of the senior management would actually be individuals who've spent the bulk of their careers in conventional banking. And so they've made a move across from conventional banking into Islamic banking. And as a result, the paradigms or the way in which they function is very much rooted in the way a conventional bank would function. So the mechanisms by which they would analyze risk, for example, would be completely conventional. And this is actually something that is of particular importance in Islamic finance, because in Islamic finance, the transactions themselves, the Sharia basis for a transaction to be legit is often rooted in valid risk being accommodated. Now, this goes against the way conventional bankers would be given to operate, in the sense that often the only form of risk they're familiar with is credit risk. For example, a classic case would be an ijara. It would be unheard of for a conventional banker to actually conceive of the fact that the lessor, if it were to be a bank, would bear major maintenance risk, whereas this is an essential risk from an Islamic lease perspective, and the key difference between an Islamic lease and a conventional lease. So what often happens in terms of the as-is that most of Islamic banking personnel are usually experienced conventional bankers. And this is actually just simply to do with the nature of the industry, in the sense that Islamic banks, in effect, have been in terms of customer expectations, in terms of the regulation, in terms of various factors, are expected to perform like conventional banks, with the additional caveat that they're Sharia compliant. And so as a result, because of the brief, because of the expectations of the shareholders and the various stakeholders, the essential management tends to be conventional banking. Now, as I touched upon, this is how so most of the people who can actually move now into Islamic banking are usually people who have a lot of experience in conventional banking. Now, what about people who want to join afresh? This is an emerging industry, and I think it would be to people's advantage who are actually coming into this field to basically get a solid qualification under their belt. The qualification could be an academic qualification, or it could be a practical focused qualification of the sort Ethica is offering. And the idea being that this would reflect that they're actually going into the industry with a basic understanding of how an Islamic bank is meant to operate.
Now,